Hey everyone, it's Alexander Robinson. Welcome to the channel, and this is my review for Pokémon the Movie 2000, which came out in July of 1999 in Japan under the subtitle Revelation Lugia. When it was released in the United States in July of 2000, it went under the subtitle The Power of One, which isn't featured on the poster, but it's featured in the title card. So already 2 Pokemon movies in, and we've gotten into the Godzilla and Gamera level of multiple titles across many different releases. Anyway, this movie takes place during the 2nd season of the anime, during the Orange Island adventures. Ashe, Misty, and Tracy find themselves in Shamudi Island, and neighboring this island are the island of Fire, Ice, and Lightning, home to the legendary Pokemon Moltres, Articuno, and Zapdos. Meanwhile, there's a collector that lives in this giant, ridiculously incomprehensible and impractical hover fortress that decides to kidnap the 3 legendary birds. And the reason for doing this is because he wants to try to flesh out the legendary Pokemon Lugia, because there's a prophecy that states that if the harmonies of fire, ice, and lightning are disturbed, the beast of the sea will emerge from the ocean to try to quell the fighting, but only with the help of a chosen one. I have a lot to say about that prophecy, but we'll move on with this plot description. So it's up to Ashe and his friends to try and save the world, because just the removal of Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno from their island homes is enough to disrupt the balance of the world and possibly destroy it. So after the release of the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, I just kind of stopped watching the anime. I felt like, well, a movie based off a TV show is most likely the series finale, so I think I'm done here. So when I got Mewtwo Strikes Back on VHS, I was shocked that at the end of it there was a sneak preview for the next Pokemon movie. Considering that Mewtwo Strikes Back came out in the US in November of 1999, this movie was already out in Japan. I mean, I didn't have as much access to the internet as I do now, so I had no way of knowing that there was a second Pokemon movie already out in Japan and that it was going to come out in the US just months later. So with the release of this movie, since I didn't pay attention to the anime, I was confused by a lot of things, like where's Brock? Who is this Tracy character? When did Ashe catch a Lapras and a Snorlax? And above all else, when did Charizard start obeying Ashe? Like, it just kind of left me perplexed. And yes, I understand that the movie was released in Japan prior to the episode where Charizard trusts Ashe. But throughout this movie, it seems very much like Charizard has finally decided to listen to Ashe. I eventually have rewatched the entire Orange Island season, and in fact, it's the only Pokemon season from the anime that I own on DVD. This is its own review that I might do someday. I don't know when, but it's not one of the best. I'll just leave it at that. But that's another review. How's the movie itself? Just basing it as a movie, I think that there are a lot of vast improvements from Mewtwo Strikes Back going into this one. First of all, the main characters that we follow this time around actually get stuff to do. The movie is more focused on them, and they get some arcs. Some of them do. Even though with the exception of Mewtwo Strikes Back, all the movies kind of exist in their own universe parallel to the anime, there's a lot in this movie that I actually do like in terms of the characters. For example, we get a better understanding of Ashe and Misty's relationship. Because if you've been a fan as long as I have, you know that Ashe and Misty started off hating each other. They kind of got on each other's nerves, but they've spent so much time together that they've looked at each other as best friends, and maybe even more than that. And this is the point in the franchise where we actually get a clear understanding of the relationship between these 2 characters. It's not really spelled out that they're in love with each other, but they've been through so much that Misty really, at the end of the day, does care for Ashe. And even though this movie isn't canon with the rest of the series, it lends itself to a big emotional payoff at the end of the Johto saga when the trio splits up. Not to mention that I'm pretty sure this is the point where all the Ashe and Misty shipping started happening. So that's something I really admire. A big step up from Mewtwo Strikes Back. The new character in this movie, Melody, actually gets an arc of her own. She only appears in this movie, but when we're first introduced to her, she comes across as a bratty teenager who doesn't care for her island's customs, and she kind of plays up her island tradition like some sort of joke. But as the movie continues to go on and she's part of this adventure with our heroes, she starts believing in the prophecy of Shamudi Island, and she becomes a far more grateful character. So for somebody who only appears in this movie and never again throughout the rest of the series, it was nice that she got an arc herself. Tracy, on the other hand, is entirely useless. And the thing is, I'm not a fan of Tracy at all. I think it mainly comes from the idea that they switched out Brock with Tracy when Brock was just a much more interesting character and definitely more memorable. And I feel bad for Tracy because I think he could have been a good character. It's just his personality is pretty dull, and it feels like the creator of the show and the director of this movie didn't really care for Tracy because he has nothing to do. He's just kind of there to make stupid remarks. Like the most he ever does in this movie is reel Misty back in after she swims out to try to save Ashe, who's unconscious in the ocean. That's about all that he does. And even with the scene in the Japanese version that got cut in the US release, that kind of has no purpose. It's like it only exists to give Tracy something to do. If you're not familiar with elements of the Japanese version, during the sequence where our heroes try to rescue Moltres and Zapdos, Ashe has Pikachu, Charizard, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur use their attacks on Moltres' cage. Bulbasaur uses Vine Whip, Charizard uses Flamethrower, Squirtle uses Water Gun, and Pikachu uses Thunderbolt. And the moment that's cut from the US version is when Tracy starts doing some math in his head on what happens when you combine Thunderbolt, Flamethrower, and Water Gun, and basically it creates some sort of explosive reaction, and Tracy tells everyone to duck and cover right before it happens. I just felt like it served no purpose, even in the Japanese version, because it slows the sequence down. And again, I'm not a huge fan of Tracy, but I do kind of feel bad that he always gets the short end of the stick. Whatever. What else do I like in the movie? Well, I think the music in the US version is actually a lot better this time around. I haven't heard any piece of music from the original Japanese score, but the score for the 4Kids version actually felt a little more bombastic, it felt more epic, and a lot more memorable than the score from the US version of Mewtwo Strikes Back. And the animation is once again stellar. The main highlight is in the action scenes, more specifically when the legendary birds are just running amok and just causing all kinds of chaos, and when they team up to fight Lugia. Those sequences are just absolutely stunning. My favorite shot in this entire movie is when we first get introduced to Lugia. Ashe nearly gets himself killed by getting in the crossfire of Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno, only for Lugia to burst out of the ocean through a giant water tornado. And we get a shot of our characters looking up at this water tornado. It looks like they're underwater, and we see Lugia's shadow fly up into the air right before it reveals itself. And that scene has always stuck out to me. And Lugia itself is a really cool Pokemon. I mean, I might be a little biased because Lugia has always been my favorite legendary Pokemon. I think because of this movie. Just because he was a brand new Pokemon, he looked cool, and by this time, Gold and Silver had not been released in the United States yet, so being able to see a new Pokemon was a neat experience, and Lugia was one that always stuck out to me. Even though he does take his sweet time to eventually rise up out of the ocean and save the world. Because Lugia waits until after Moltres and Zapdos have been captured, the world is starting to freeze, and the villain starts going after Articuno. So clearly I have a lot to say about this movie that's in a more positive light than Mewtwo Strikes Back. There are so many improvements upon this movie, except for the story. The story and this bogus prophecy is what really drags it down. And first I want to talk about the film's villain, Lawrence III. And I only know his name because of the internet. Not once throughout this entire movie is this character even given a name. But he's the first one to tell us about this prophecy. And it's weird because he talks about how it would put the world in danger, but he has no problem at all just ignoring the entire prophecy to try to get Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno basically to get to Lugia. So he is perfectly fine with letting the world be destroyed just for his own ego. And not only is he stupid enough to let the entire world be destroyed despite being the first person to tell us about this prophecy, but he's also stupid enough that when our heroes get captured by accident, he lets them free, knowing very well that they are against his plan. Though I gotta say, his reaction when he realizes that Moltres and Zapdos are free, and that his giant hovercraft is about to crash into Lightning Island, is hilarious. Moltres and Zapdos are flying right across his cockpit view as he's trying to capture Articuno, and he has this look like... And then as the onboard computer is warning him that the ship is going to crash into Lightning Island, he just looks annoyed, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, what did you think was going to happen when you released all those people you accidentally captured? Of course they were going to release Moltres and Zapdos. So that is entirely on you, buddy. You let those people free, you're paying the consequences. And now for the prophecy. I've never been a fan of prophecies in movies. Like, it certainly didn't work for Alice in Wonderland. I don't think it worked for Star Wars as a whole. The only time I've ever seen it really work was Harry Potter, and that's about it. This prophecy is so vague, nonsensical, and flat out stupid, and when you try to dissect it, it raises further questions. Like the line, "The earth shall turn to ash." How does it know it's talking about a person's name and not the world literally being turned to ash? And on top of all that, how is Ash Ketchum himself the one that the prophecy is talking about? That could have referred to any Ash out there, or hell, it could have referred to any woman out there named Ashley. And then why would removing Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno from their homes disrupt the balance of life and cause the destruction of the world? That makes no sense at all. Even when Professor Oak tries to give us a scientific explanation for this happening, it still makes no sense. And then as for all the Pokemon gathering at Shimudi Island to try to save the world, it's just stupid and pointless. They end up being the pirate lords in Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, where, yeah, they're introduced, and then they don't do anything afterwards. There is admittedly a neat idea in there where Pokemon are more in tune with nature than humans, much like with animals in the real world. Sometimes animals know things that we humans don't know, and that's a cool idea to explore in the world of Pokemon, but this movie doesn't do that. And then lastly, there's some really awkward and forced jokes. The two that come to mind immediately for me is when Team Rocket make a Weight Watchers joke, and I'm like, wait a minute, where did that come from? And then there's a joke earlier in the movie where one character goes, and she said, "No, but I have Krabbies," and I'm thinking, what's the setup for that joke? Like, we heard the punchline. I want to know what the setup was, because, phrasing. So at the end of the day, Pokemon 2000 is an improvement over Mewtwo Strikes Back. In some aspects. The animation is just as gorgeous as ever, the characters actually get a lot more to do, and I even enjoy the moment where Team Rocket ends up helping Ash because, yeah, we're bad guys, but we don't want the world to be destroyed. As I've gotten older and rewatched bits of the anime, I always felt like Team Rocket didn't need to be in every single episode, let alone all the movies. But they have their moments here and there, and at the very least, they get something to do in this movie than in Mewtwo Strikes Back and in Pokemon 3, which we'll get to next week. But the thing that really cripples the movie from being technically good is the whole prophecy nonsense and the story and the villain. It does have its shining moments, but I can't give it a high recommendation. So I'm going to give this the same rating I gave Mewtwo Strikes Back. Watch at your own risk. It is an improvement. If you're a hardcore Pokemon fan, you've already seen this, and you probably enjoyed this movie. But if you're not into Pokemon, this is not going to be the thing that changes your mind. In fact, I wouldn't recommend any of the movies or the TV show as your first introduction to Pokemon, unless you were a kid. And much like with Mewtwo Strikes Back, there was a short film that played before this movie. In this case, it's Pikachu's Rescue Adventure, which is just as cute as Pikachu's Vacation, and actually has a story. Pikachu, Squirtle, Bulbasaur, Misty's Psyduck, and Tracy's Venonat and Meryl have to try to rescue Misty's Togepi, who gets lost, and they come across an Elekid, several other Pokemon, and it's cute. I think it's a downgrade from Pikachu's Vacation because there's a lot of padding in a plotline that could have easily resolved itself, which, funny enough, it ends up resolving itself. And to rewatch this short and this movie that introduced a bunch of Generation 2 Pokemon like Ledia, Hoot Hoot, Elekid, Slowking, and Lugia, it's really weird watching it now considering that there's 9 generations and over 1,000 Pokemon. But as for a rating for the short, it's the same rating. Watch at your own risk. It's cute, it's enjoyable in parts, but again, there's only so much I can take of these Pokemon saying their names constantly for about 20 minutes. And there you go, that's my review for Pokemon the Movie 2000, aka The Power of One in the US, aka Revelation Lugia in Japan. Next week we're going to be moving into the third Pokemon movie, and the one that I think I watched the most as a kid. I only own 2 Pokemon movies on VHS, and that was Mewtwo Strikes Back, and next week's review, Pokemon 3 the movie. I have not watched this movie since I owned it on VHS, so this is going to be an interesting rewatch to see if it still holds up, or much like with Mewtwo Strikes Back, it doesn't. We'll find out next week. But until then, I want to know what you guys think about Pokemon the Movie 2000. If you've seen it, what did you think? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day and take care of yourselves.